So I want you to think back to a time recently where maybe you said yes to something, but you desperately meant no?
Oh, yeah. I think we've all been there.
Right. Or maybe you stayed in a situation like a job or a relationship that was clearly just draining the life out of you.
Yeah, or even consider a time you reacted to a totally minor annoyance with, like, explosive, out-of-proportion rage.
Exactly. And then later you catch yourself thinking, I have no idea why I did that. That wasn't me.
We all have those moments of looking in the mirror and just, well, not quite recognizing the person driving our actions.
Yeah.
And the premise of our deep dive today suggests a rather uncomfortable truth about those moments. You didn't actually do those things.
Wait, really?
Right? The hidden, unlived part of your psyche, which is known as your shadow, did them for you.
Okay, let's unpack this because we're basically looking at the parts of your own mind that are actively making decisions for you without your permission.
That's exactly it.
So to map out these invisible forces, we've pulled together a really fascinating stack of sources.
We definitely have.
Yeah, we're drawing from foundational texts by the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, specifically his work Aeon.
Which is a dense read, to say the least.
Oh, incredibly dense. But we're also using clinical insights from modern Jungian analyst James Hollis, plus a comprehensive guide from a practicing Jungian therapist.
Right, and we've also got some really practical breakdowns from high existence and Harley therapy to ground it all.
Yeah, so it's a dense collection of material, but our mission today is pretty straightforward. We want to show you how to spot your own psychological blind spots in real time.
Right, and understand the mechanics of how they hijack your behavior.
Exactly. And ultimately, discover how you can turn your darkest, most rejected traits into your greatest hidden strengths.
Which is the best part.
Mm-hmm.
So if you follow psychology, you're likely already familiar with the basic anatomy of the mind that Jung proposed.
Right, you've got the conscious ego.
Yeah, the ego is that voice in your head right now that thinks of itself as a rational, good person. And then you know the persona, which is the curated social mask we all wear.
Like the one for our coworkers or our social media followers.
Exactly. So the shadow, then, is basically the dumping ground.
It's like a psychological junk drawer.
Yes. It's where we shove all the parts of ourselves we reject or deny or just feel ashamed of. And that's usually because our childhood environments or society told us those traits were unacceptable.
Right, so the formation of that junk drawer is just a pure survival mechanism.
Completely. I mean,
Right.
A child learns very quickly what gets them praised and what gets them punished.
Yeah, like if you were mocked for crying, your sadness gets shoved into the shadow.
Exactly. Or if you were told that being assertive was, bossy or rude, your natural authority goes into the shadow. You basically bifurcate your personality to stay safe within your tribe.
But here's where I think modern behavioral therapies, like CBT for instance, might offer some pushback.
Well, for sure.
Because modern psychology often tells us to focus on the present, right? Change your conscious thoughts, change your habits, and just move forward.
Right. Don't dwell on the past.
Yeah. So why do we need to go digging through a childhood junk drawer? If I want to be a polite, functional person, burying the impolite, antisocial part seems like a completely logical strategy.
It does make sense on the surface.
Right. Like, what is the actual harm in just keeping that drawer closed?
Well, it sounds practical until you understand, like the thermodynamics of the psyche. Our sources rely heavily on the iceberg metaphor for a reason.
The tip of the iceberg?
Right. The conscious mind is just the tip visible above the water, but the massive invisible ice underneath is where the actual weight and momentum are.
Oh, wow.
Psychological energy doesn't just evaporate because you consciously decided to ignore it. Suppressing a trait doesn't destroy it. It merely relocates it into the unconscious.
So it's still operating just out of our direct line of sight.
Exactly. Down there in the dark, those rejected traits fester and they mutate. Because they are isolated from your conscious awareness, they become primitive.
So you haven't cleanly disposed of your anger or your selfishness.
You've given them a damp basement to rot the foundation of your house.
That is a terrifying visual.
It really is. And because this energy has to go somewhere, it begins to operate autonomously.
Okay, so if this shadow energy is acting autonomously underneath the surface, we need to know how to spot the ripples.
Yes. Which brings us to what Jungians call complexes.
Right, and the literature describes them almost like splintered off personalities that act as puppet masters.
Yeah, puppet masters is a great way to put it, because when a complex gets triggered, it bypasses the conscious ego entirely.
It just takes over.
Exactly. And the primary mechanism these puppet masters use to interact with the world is projection.
Now, projection is a term that gets tossed around casually all the time, right?
Right, but in this clinical context, the mechanics are highly specific. Basically, the ego is fragile.
Super fragile.
It cannot tolerate the cognitive dissonance of believing, I am a good person, while simultaneously harboring these intense, social, unacceptable urges.
So it has to find an outlet.
Right. So the psyche performs this neat magic trick. It takes those internal flaws and superimposes them onto the people around you.
You literally see your own rejected darkness walking around in the bodies of others.
Exactly.
There's a highly specific story from the high existence source that illustrates this perfectly.
Oh, the runaway story.
Yes. So the author recounts a memory from when she was 7 years old. She decides she's going to run away from home, and she convinces her little brother to come along.
As older siblings do.
Right. So they pack a Sesame Street suitcase with cookies, they pry open a first-story window, and she tells her little brother to jump into the bushes first.
He follows her lead, naturally.
Of course he does. But as she's sitting there on the ledge, the reality of the situation hits her. She realizes they're going to get into massive, massive trouble.
The panic sets in.
Total panic. It completely paralyzes her. But instead of admitting to her brother that she made a mistake, or admitting she was terrified, she runs straight to her mother.
This part is so wild.
It is. She reports that her brother is trying to run away. She positions herself as the savior who caught him, while he ends up grounded in the bushes, entirely betrayed.
It's so sad, but the psychological mechanics beneath that betrayal are fascinating because they scale up into adulthood.
How so?
Well, that little girl's ego was entirely built around being the responsible older sister who was always right. Admitting she instigated a terrible idea would shatter that identity and just flood her with shame.
Right.
So to survive that moment, her psyche projected the deviance completely onto her brother. She made him the sole perpetrator so she can remain the hero.
So what does this all mean for us? Because we see this translated into adult behavior all the time.
Oh, constantly.
Think about the Reddit sources analogy of Bruce Banner and the Hulk. Bruce Banner's conscious persona is the mild-mannered, highly controlled scientist.
Like he suppresses all aggression.
Yeah, he suppresses all assertiveness, but all that unintegrated anger has to go somewhere, so it manifests as a giant, uncontrollable rage monster.
The Hulk takes the wheel because Banner's ego refuses to process healthy anger.
Exactly. And we do our own version of this when we leave vitriolic comments about how toxic internet trolls are, completely blind to the fact that our own rage is just a projection of our internal insecurities.
Yeah, or when someone berates a customer service worker over a minor error to compensate for their own deep-seated feelings of powerlessness.
Okay, but that Bruce Banner analogy brings us to a crucial warning from James Hollis, because Banner is a certified genius, right?
He is.
You would assume that highly intelligent, self-aware people could simply outthink their shadow.
That's the assumption, yeah.
We tend to believe that if we just read enough psychology or understand our childhood traumas clearly enough, we can just override these irrational projections.
And that seems to be the entire premise of the self-help industry. Like, if you have enough insight, you win.
But Hollis argues the exact opposite, doesn't he?
He does. He says intelligence does not protect you from the shadow. It refines it. Yeah, a highly intellectual person doesn't destroy their shadow. They just give it a better vocabulary.
So the intellect just becomes a more sophisticated defense mechanism for the puppet master.
Precisely. If you are smart, you are infinitely better at rationalizing your emotional, shadow-driven decisions.
I can definitely see that.
Instead of just throwing a tantrum, an intelligent person can construct a brilliant, airtight, logically flawless argument for why their partner is objectively to blame for a relationship failing.
Completely masking their own deep-seated fear of intimacy.
Exactly. Insight alone does not alter behavior because the shadow does not react to objective reality. It reacts to meaning and it reacts to memory.
Which perfectly explains why we see people repeating the exact same toxic relationship dynamics over and over, just swapping out the partners.
Right. The conscious mind insists this time is different. This person is different.
But the unconscious psyche is just setting up a stage play to resolve unfinished emotional business from, 20 years ago. The current partner is merely a prop. The shadow is reacting to an old wound.
And if that cycle isn't broken, we arrive at the really chilling warning Jung lays out in Aeon.
Right.
He states that if a person stubbornly refuses to recognize their own projections, if they spend their life insisting that everyone else is the problem, they become entirely isolated.
And Jung uses a phrase here that I think requires some historical context for us to unpack.
Yeah, it definitely does.
He describes this state as an autoerotic or autistic condition. Now, let's clarify that terminology for a modern audience, because in the 1950s, psychiatric jargon was vastly different.
Very different.
When Jung uses the word autistic here, he isn't referring to the modern neurodevelopmental autism spectrum at all.
No, not at all.
He's using its Greek root, autos, meaning self. He's describing someone who has become completely self-absorbed and fundamentally withdrawn from objective reality.
That's a vital distinction.
Yeah.
He's describing a profound psychological isolation.
Yeah.
This person spins a cocoon of illusion around themselves. They continuously sabotage their own career, alienate their friends, and ruin their relationships, all while shaking their fist at what they call a faithless world.
They are trapped in a nightmare of their own making, basically blaming the mirrors for their own reflection.
Exactly.
But if one person's unintegrated shadow can spin a cocoon of illusion that destroys their life, the logical next question is, what happens when projection scales up?
Right. What happens when an individual runs out of personal targets, like family members or coworkers, to project their darkness onto?
Yeah, what then?
They seek out larger targets. This is where personal neurosis metastasizes into historical catastrophe, creating what Jung called the collective shadow.
Because humans naturally organize into tribes.
Exactly. When an entire group of people shares an underlying anxiety or a repressed darkness, they pool their psychic energy. They create echo chambers where they mutually validate each other's illusions.
And a group echo chamber always needs an external enemy to sustain itself.
Always. The mechanics of projection demand a target. So the group projects all of its collective flaws, fears, and perceived evils onto a designated outgroup.
And the sources point out impartially that this mechanism functions identically, regardless of political ideology, geography, or era, right?
Yeah, the literature is super clear that this isn't a left or right thing, it's a human thing. Whenever any group unites in a fervent, uncompromising hatred of the other, and views themselves as the sole arbiters of purity while painting their opponents as the embodiment of evil, you are witnessing the collective shadow at work.
It's the literal mechanism behind societal dehumanization.
It is.
The sources use the Holocaust as the ultimate historical example of this. An entire society was swept up in a mass psychosis, convinced that their own internal decay was actually the fault of a marginalized group.
Right. It is the exact same psychological mechanism as the 7-year-old girl blaming her brother in the bushes.
But scaled up to a lethal industrial level.
Exactly. The group refuses to look in the mirror, so they attempt to destroy the canvas they projected onto.
It's a terrifying capacity inherent in human nature. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Yes, the twist.
The deeper we dig into these sources, the more we uncover this massive twist in Jungian theory. The shadow isn't exclusively a repository for evil, destructive, or aggressive traits.
Not at all.
It also contains the golden shadow.
The golden shadow. This completely flips the script on how we view our repressed selves. Because society and parents don't just punish bad behavior. Often, they punish brilliance.
Oh, absolutely.
Consider a child raised in an environment that demands absolute compliance, or maybe by parents who are deeply insecure. If that child demonstrates fierce independence, natural leadership, or raw creative talent,
the parents might subtly or overtly shame them for it.
Exactly. The child learns that outshining their family threatens their safety and belonging in the tribe. So they take their ambition, their creativity, and their personal power, and they lock it away in the junk drawer.
They numb the light just as thoroughly as they numb the dark. The Hartley therapy source highlights this regarding emotions, too. We're taught that anger is a negative emotion that should be suppressed. But healthy, integrated anger is the exact mechanism that provides the courage to set firm boundaries.
Right. And we suppress sadness because it makes others uncomfortable. But sadness is the psychological tool required to process grief and actually let go of the past.
You cannot selectively anesthetize the psyche. If you cut off the dark, you sever your connection to your own vitality.
The golden shadow represents all your unlived potential.
Which brings us to the most urgent part of this deep dive.
The how-to.
Yeah. We understand the anatomy of the shadow. We know how it controls us through projection, how it scales into societal tribalism, and how it hoards our unlived potential. How do we actually integrate it?
Right.
How do we open the junk drawer without letting the rotting foundation collapse the house?
Well, the Wikipedia source offers a brilliant literary framework for this process, which is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Okay, I love this analogy.
Right, because the goal of shadow work is assimilation, not possession. Dr. Jekyll must integrate the raw, vital energy of Mr. Hyde, but Hyde cannot be allowed to take the wheel.
You don't want the Hulk mindlessly smashing cities. You want the intellect of Banner integrated with the invincible strength of the Hulk.
Perfectly said. And to achieve that assimilation, the sources provide some incredibly practical frameworks. James Hollis suggests the very first step is a fundamental shift in how you interrogate your own behavior.
Okay, what's the shift?
We have to stop asking what is wrong with me and start asking what part of me is trying to express itself.
Wow. That subtle shift in language completely removes the paralyzing weight of shame, doesn't it?
It does. It transforms a perceived character flaw into neutral data. A destructive habit is no longer a moral failure. It is structured communication from the unconscious.
And once you view it as data, you can start tracking it. The sources recommend an exercise called trigger mapping.
Yeah, this is super practical.
For a week or two, you simply observe your disproportionate emotional spikes. When you feel a sudden intense surge of anxiety, rage, or jealousy over something objectively minor, just write it down.
You don't need to fix it immediately, but you need to find the pattern. The shadow rarely reveals itself in a single event. Its signature is repetition.
And alongside tracking your own triggers, you can perform a projection audit.
Right.
When you find yourself fiercely judging someone else, when you encounter a person whose specific traits just make your blood boil, force yourself to pause, ask the uncomfortable question, what structurally similar trait lives unacknowledged within me?
And that is a brutal mirror to look into.
It really is. Like, if I feel an intense, irrational hatred for a colleague who is highly arrogant and self-promotional, a projection audit demands that I look at where I am secretly suppressing my own ambition.
Exactly. Or where you are desperately starving for the very validation they are receiving.
Right. It requires a level of radical honesty that most people simply won't tolerate.
They won't. But this brings us to what is arguably the most crucial insight of our entire deep dive, provided by the practicing Jungian therapist from the Reddit source.
Which is?
Doing the audits and finding the patterns isn't enough. The therapist states, insight into the myth of the unconscious must be converted into ethical obligation.
We mentioned earlier that intelligence just refines the shadow. This is the antidote to that trap, isn't it?
It is.
Insight without action is just intellectual entertainment.
Exactly. Journaling about your golden shadow does nothing if you don't alter your real-world behavior. Let's say your projection audit reveals that your intense jealousy of musicians stems from the fact that your parents shamed you for being loud, leading you to repress your own musical aptitude.
Okay.
Having that profound psychological realization does not heal you.
Right. Knowing why you are jealous doesn't stop the jealousy.
To integrate that golden shadow, you have to endure the agonizing discomfort of being a beginner. You have to literally go purchase an instrument, sacrifice your free time, rearrange your schedule, sit down, and actually play.
You heal by dragging the internal realization out of the unconscious and forcing it into physical reality.
You have to systematically dismantle the illusion that there is a magical, effortless mental hack.
Integrating the shadow means taking concrete action in the real world, especially when it terrifies you.
You integrate the unlived life by finally living it.
That is so powerful. Let's bring all these threads together. We started by exploring this hidden psychological junk drawer born from our primal childhood need to conform and stay safe.
Right.
We've seen how simply suppressing our rejected traits doesn't eliminate them, but instead transforms them into autonomous puppet masters that hijack our behavior.
And we examined how the ego uses projection to survive shame, superimposing our own darkness onto others, and how our intellect often acts as a bodyguard for the shadow, building rational defenses for our worst repeating patterns.
And we scaled that up, seeing how individual projection pools together to create the collective shadow, fueling societal tribalism and echo chambers.
But the ultimate takeaway here is one of empowerment. Reclaiming your suppressed power, both the dark and the golden, requires trigger mapping, projection audits, and above all, real-world action.
Doing this inner work doesn't turn you into a flawless, enlightened saint who never makes a mistake.
No, of course not.
But it does give you your freedom back. It puts you in the driver's seat of your own life. And by doing the brutal work of withdrawing your own projections, you actively stop contributing to the collective shadow that tears the world apart.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering thought to process as you go about your day. We spent a lot of time analyzing how we project our negative, destructive traits onto our enemies.
Right.
But consider the flip side of that mechanism. What about the people you idolize?
The people we put on pedestals.
Think about the leaders, the artists, or the visionaries you admire most deeply. What if the staggering brilliance, the unshakable confidence, or the fierce creativity you revere in your greatest heroes isn't entirely theirs?
Oh, wow.
What if the magnitude of what you see in them is actually a projection of your own unintegrated golden shadow? That greatness you're constantly searching for out in the world might just be sitting in your own psychological junk drawer, waiting for you to finally open it, claim it, and bring it into the light.